After the end of a good fight, you deserve an ice-cold reward. Modelo, you put in the hours, the energy, the tough labor, because you know the bigger the fight, the better the reward. Modelo, the mark of the fighter. Drink responsibly. Beer imported by Crown Imports, Chicago, Illinois.
Today's episode will touch on sensitive topics, such as child death. So if you are sensitive to this content, please listen at your own discretion. What is art without the muse? Many of Western art's most famous works are depictions of women. But who were these women? Do they have their own stories to share with the world? Hello and welcome to ArtMuse, a podcast that aims to reshape the ways in which we interpret well-known works of art by paying dues to the women whose images have been immortalized, but whose names and stories have been wrongfully overlooked. While these women's faces are familiar to viewers around the world, their identities have been largely forgotten. Together, we will appreciate these works of art from a new perspective, through the eyes of the women whose image stares back at us. Is the muse in actuality just as, if not more important than the artists themselves? And I'm your host, Grace Anna. Welcome to part 2 of our 2-part episode on Lady Emma Hamilton. In part 1, we explored Emma's impoverished beginnings, her brave journey to London at the mere age of 12, her time as a housemaid, theater assistant, dancer in the notorious Temple of Health, and eventually the mistress to Charles Greville. We then explored Emma's prodigious relationship with painter George Romney, and the many masterpieces they together created, her flirtatious bond with Sir William, and finally, Greville's deceitful plan to send Emma to Naples for good. We left things off in our story just after Emma faced the grim reality that Greville had abandoned her, and that her life as she had known it would never be the same. Emma continued to send Greville angry letters, to which she never received a response. In one last-ditch effort, she wrote to Greville, "I have lived with you 5 years, and you have sent me to a strange place. Me thinking you was coming to me. What am I to do?" Greville finally responded, reiterating that the relationship was really over. In a final letter, Emma wrote, "You have abandoned me. If you knew what pain I feel, nothing can express my rage. I am all madness." Emma could not believe that the man she had been loyal to, catered to his every demand, changed her name, and dropped every previous relations for, and who had profited off the sale of her portraits, could cut her out of her life with seemingly little remorse. But one of Emma's most admirable traits was her ability to make the best of even the most devastating of situations. Accepting her new reality, she began to appreciate Naples with fresh eyes. She enjoyed how the city burst with life, the nightly street parties, the carnivals and masquerades, and the brightly colored buildings. Emma also began to warm up to her life with Sir William. His palazzo offered luxurious perks she had never before experienced, like a proper WC, and he showered Emma with an endless flow of gifts. He whisked her off to operas and plays, serenaded her over the finest of dinners, bought her her own hand-painted carriage with a horse and footman, and purchased a brand new wardrobe for her. That summer, Sir William took Emma to the newly discovered ancient city of Pompeii, and they spent time in Sir William's home in Posillipo, where she was able to climb Mount Vesuvius. As Emma wrote, "In my life, I never saw so fine a sight. The lava runs about 5 miles down from the top. When we got up, there was the finest fountain of liquid fire falling down. And as it runs down, it sets fire to the trees and brushwood so that the mountain looked like one entire mountain of fire." Emma greatly enjoyed these Italian adventures, which ignited her childlike wonder and enthusiasm for all the world had to offer. She certainly was living la dolce vita. As time went on, her affections towards Sir William warmed. She appreciated his efforts to comfort her as she reeled from Greville's betrayal. He always offered her a shoulder to cry on and treated her with both kindness and patience. It was clear that Sir William was falling deeper and deeper in love with Emma. He admired not only her beauty, but also her adventurous spirit, and Emma began to reciprocate his feelings. By that Christmas, Emma and Sir William officially became lovers. It didn't take long for Emma to fall wildly in love with Sir William, too, despite their close to 40-year age difference. She was almost taken aback by how strong her desire for Sir William was. Just 6 months prior, she had thought she would never find love again, and here she was in the most loving and secure relationship she had ever experienced. Despite Greville's selfishness, Emma had to admit that his plan had more than worked out. Emma moved from her ground floor suite into Sir William's private apartments. They began to spend all of their time with each other. He loved teaching Emma about Naples, showing her his extensive collection of antique items from Pompeii, and regaling her with stories from his past. Emma greatly enjoyed Sir William's impressive library and took to improving her education. She even began lessons in Italian and French, and soon she became fluent in both. Emma couldn't have been happier. She was in a loving and stable relationship with a man who worshipped her, was showered with expensive gifts, and was living a life of luxury in a vibrant and lively city. To celebrate their love, Sir William began commissioning various painters and sculptors to make portraits of Emma. She wrote to a friend, "The house is full of painters painting me. All the artists have come from Rome to study me, and Sir William has fitted up a room that is called the painting room." By mid-1787, Sir William had commissioned 9 new portraits. Interestingly, 2 of the artists who painted Emma during this time were female: Elizabeth Vigée Lebrun and Angelica Kauffmann. Elizabeth Vigée Lebrun was a French court painter, famous for her many portraits of Marie Antoinette. Sir William arranged for Vigée Lebrun to paint Emma during one of her travels to Naples. In 1790, she painted 2 portraits of Emma. In one, titled Lady Hamilton is Ariadne, Emma reclines erotically upon a leopard skin rug. Her Grecian robe slips just below her breast, adding to the painting's seductive nature. She holds in her hand a golden goblet, as if she is waiting for it to be filled with wine. As Vigée Lebrun herself described the work, "I painted Madame Hart reclining by the side of the sea, holding a cup in her hand. She had a beautiful, very lively face and voluptuous tresses of fine chestnut, which could cover her whole body completely, so she looked wonderful." The painting was known to be Sir William's favorite, and he hung it in the center of his reception room. Emma was also painted by the Swiss painter Angelica Kauffmann, who visited Naples from Rome. Painted in 1791, we find Emma in Kauffmann's Lady Hamilton as Muse. Here Emma is also posed as goddess, holding a Grecian theater mask in her hand. Like the mask, Emma has a changeable visage, with an endless supply of expressions and poses. She leans against a thick green stage curtain, reminding us that the painting is an act. The portrait certainly seems to be an ode to Emma's own talents as a performer, for her performance skills would only strengthen in Naples. By 1787, Emma began to experiment with a performance she dubbed Attitudes. Drawing from her time in Romney's studio, Emma held various poses in front of a group of friends, using drapery to add dramatic effect. In between poses, she morphed herself into different characters, with such veracity that it left viewers shocked. seamlessly shifting from a joyous pose to one of grief to one of anger. Attitudes showed her genius and versatility as an entertainer. What started as a show for friends soon grew in popularity, and it didn't take long before all of Naples were lining up to see Emma perform Attitudes. The German writer Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who visited Naples in 1787, was lucky enough to catch one of her performances. As he described to a friend, she lets down her hair and, with a few shawls, gives so much variety to her poses, gestures, expressions, that the spectator can hardly believe his eyes. The viewer sees what thousands of artists would have liked to express, realized before him. Standing, kneeling, sitting, reclining, serious, sad, playful, ecstatic, contrite, alluring, threatening, anxious. One pose follows another without break. She knows how to arrange the fold of her veil to match each mood, and has 1,000 ways of turning it into a headdress. One gets a sense why Emma was so popular with artists, and why she made such a unique and successful artist model. Emma's Attitudes became the talk of the town, and it was a main tourist attraction in Naples. People near and far flocked to watch her perform, and all were in awe of her talent. But more than this, Attitudes was a vehicle through which Emma's creative spirit could shine, and attest to the fact that she was an artist in her own right. She would go on to perform Attitudes for the next 20 years, well into her late 40s. After 3 years of being romantically involved, Emma was ready for marriage. She longed to finally become more than just a mistress to a man, and wanted the reassurance that she would never be abandoned again. She also knew that with marriage would come a title. She would officially become Lady Emma Hamilton. This title had many perks, including the ability to be received by the Neapolitan royal court. Emma began pressuring Sir William to tie the knot, but he was at first hesitant. Given her somewhat dubious background, Sir William worried their marriage could compromise his good standing in high society and his position at the court. Sir William was faced with a choice. He could risk staying in the good graces of his high society connections, or risk losing Emma. And he was not willing to give Emma and their deep love for one another up. He knew he would never find another woman as beautiful as Emma, and who shared all his same interests. Despite his friends' and family's protests, Sir William made arrangements to marry Emma in England. By early 1792, Emma, soon to be Lady Hamilton, was finally returning to her mother country to marry the man of her dreams. How did Emma feel to be returning to England, a changed woman? Was she excited to see old friends, to rub her happiness in Greville's face? Did she hope that she might be able to see her daughter? Who was she most looking forward to reuniting with? We can certainly assume that Romney would have been a top runner. One of the first places Emma went upon her return to London was Romney's studio. Hearing she had returned, Romney quickly canceled all other plans to give his greatest muse a warm welcome. He excitedly wrote to a friend, "At present, and the greatest part of the summer, I shall be engaged in painting pictures from the Divine Lady, for I think her superior to all womankind." Between the months of June and July, Romney painted Emma a staggering 38 times. Emma, who was by now a social icon in London, attracted large crowds to Romney's studio, and London's elite began to commission portraits of Emma, including the Prince of Wales. That early summer, Sir William put preparations in order to get married. He revised his will, securing Emma a yearly income after his death. Because he had no other male heirs and an appreciation for arranging his relations to Emma, Sir William bequeathed the rest of his estate to Charles Greville. Finally, on the morning of September 6, 1792, Emma and Sir William got married in the St. Marylebone Church. Sir William was 60 years old, and Emma only 24. Emma was thrilled to graduate from mistress to wife and officially be Lady Emma Hamilton. As Emma bragged in a letter to a friend, "Am I Emma Hamilton? It seems impossible. Surely no person was ever as happy as I am." To mark her marriage, Romney painted one final portrait of Emma. Titled The Ambassadress, Romney captured Emma in her wedding dress, seated with her hands in prayer, staring at the viewer over her shoulder. Here she is no longer under the guise of goddess or allegory, but is Lady Emma Hamilton herself. In the background, a murky Mount Vesuvius smokes, alluding to Emma's return to her home of Naples. In Romney's portrait, she is suspended in this moment of transition, from the scrappy girl of London streets to a matured married lady, the ambassadress of Naples. Just 2 weeks after their wedding, Sir William and Emma made arrangements to return to Italy. Emma had hoped that she could see little Emma during her stay in England, but considering her fame, she didn't want a visit to bring unwanted attention to her daughter. Instead, she sent her mother to check on little Emma, who had been living in Manchester. We can only imagine how painful it must have been for Emma to not be able to see and hug her own child herself. But Emma wasn't the only one in despair. Upon Emma's leave, Romney fell into a deep depression and refused to take on any other portrait commissions for over half a year. Instead, he locked himself in his studio and manically sketched Emma, trying to never forget every detail of her face. These drawings became increasingly more nightmarish as the desperate artist poured all of his grief into these works. He would continue to paint and draw Emma from memory for the rest of his life. Sir William and Emma took a roundabout route back to Naples, stopping in Paris that September. France was in the throes of the French Revolution, and Sir William and Emma wanted to see the action in the flesh. Emma dreamed of meeting the infamous Queen Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette and the king had long since been imprisoned, and she was being held in the Palace of Tuileries. Her situation was dire. At any moment, she and the king could meet their bloody end. With few to turn to, she was desperate to get word to her sister, Maria Carolina, the Queen of Naples. And thus was Emma's in with Marie Antoinette. Returning to Naples soon, Emma could offer her a safe and assured way to get a letter to her sister. Believing she was her last lifeline, Marie Antoinette hurriedly agreed to meet Emma. Emma had long heard tales of Marie Antoinette's beauty and glamour, and almost gasped when instead she was met with an emaciated gray-haired woman. Though only 36 years old, the stress of the French Revolution had aged Marie Antoinette significantly. But Emma was eager to befriend the renowned queen, and the chance to help her in her greatest time of need exhilarated Emma. At their meeting, Marie Antoinette anxiously slipped a letter to her sister to Emma, and pleaded that she deliver it safely, entrusting with Emma her survival. Without trying, Emma had found her way into the heart of one of the most important political events in Western history. She held Marie Antoinette's last letter in her hands. We'll continue our story after a brief word from our advertisers.
If your day sounds like
We need the report ASAP.
you deserve Modelo, if you've persevered through,
2 more reps, 2 more.
you deserve this ice-cold reward. Modelo, the mark of a fighter. Drink responsibly. Beer imported by Crown Imports, Chicago, Illinois.
Welcome back, listeners. Now let's dive back in. A month later, Emma and Sir William arrived back in Naples. Before delivering the letter, Emma had to quickly learn the ways of being an official lady and the proper etiquette of the Neapolitan court. Women of her status were expected to conduct themselves in a specific way, and the slightest mistake could cost one their reputation. Actions as small as entering a room had specific rituals attached to them. Emma worked hard to transform herself into a lady who would be accepted by the Queen. Queen Maria Carolina was arguably the most influential queen in all of Europe at the time. Raised in the Austrian court with her sister, Marie Antoinette, Maria Carolina was sent to Naples at the age of 15 to marry King Ferdinand. King Ferdinand was, for lack of a better word, a man-child, who much preferred to go off on hunts than bore himself with his political duties. Though she was the queen, Maria Carolina quickly positioned herself as his political puppeteer and had assumed almost all of the king's power behind closed doors. Queen Maria Carolina first agreed to meet Emma in private. She appreciated all of Emma's efforts to learn the ways of the court, and though Emma did not have the best of reputations, she was willing to give her a chance. Hardly exchanging pleasantries, Emma launched into a tearful description of Marie Antoinette and handed Maria Carolina the letter. The Queen was greatly touched by Emma's concern and endeared by her sincerity. Maria Carolina was desperately worried about Marie Antoinette and clung to Emma as a link between her and her doomed sister. Unfortunately, to avoid attaching herself politically to France, Maria Carolina was not allowed to respond to Marie Antoinette, and so she turned to Emma, the last person she knew to have seen her dear sister in her greatest time of need. Soon, Emma and the Queen were attached at the hip. She began to depend on Emma's support as she watched her sister's ill fate from afar. Emma was ever ready to please the Queen and happy to devote all of her time comforting her. But they didn't just commiserate together. In time, they learned to really enjoy each other's company, gossiping, reading books, and practicing their French together. The Queen loved Emma's warm sense of humor and genuine enthusiasm about the world. By late 1792, Emma had officially become the Queen's favorite. But Marie Antoinette's situation only worsened. In January 1793, King Louis XVI was executed, and Marie Antoinette feared that she was next. Queen Maria Carolina pleaded with England to ally with Naples and fight against the uprisings in France. Not only was her sister's life at stake, but royal courts across Europe had reason to fear an uprising in their countries too. But Maria Carolina's desire to ally Naples with England not only had political advantages. Little did she and Emma know that the English general that they would send to Naples would forever change the course of Emma's life. Horatio Nelson was a retired shipman. He had felt snubbed by the English Navy, who failed to appreciate his skill and service. Looking for an opportunity for fame and glory, when Nelson heard that the English Navy was in need of a general to fight the French in Naples, he knew his moment to shine had finally arrived. Nelson first came to Naples on September 10, 1793. Queen Maria Carolina was thrilled to welcome much-needed aid, and she brought Emma along to greet Nelson's ship. Though Nelson was exhausted from the tedious journey, he immediately perked up when he saw the beautiful woman standing next to the Queen, who he recognized as the famous model, Lady Emma Hamilton. During his stay, Emma and Sir William situated Nelson in their palazzo. Honored to host the man who would protect the city against the French, Emma took extra care to cater to Nelson's every need, preparing him decadent meals, taking him to the royal court, and listening attentively to his stories of battle. To make him feel extra special, Emma acted especially flirtatious around Nelson. If this wasn't enough to tantalize him, the bedroom prepared for Nelson was adorned with paintings of Emma as various nymphs and goddesses. Above his bed hung Vigée Lebrun's seductive painting of Emma, reclining on a leopard rug. If the man wasn't smitten already, he now had a whole room of fantastical images of Emma to ogle over. At the time, Nelson was 35 years old and very unhappily married. He and his wife Fanny were not at all compatible. She was very strict, religious, and uptight, and had been sending him nagging letters to return to England. To make matters worse, Fanny was unable to bear children, adding to Nelson's long list of resentments. Nelson was not necessarily a handsome man. Thin and short, with pale skin, ginger hair, and sunken eyes, he was not known for his good looks. But he did have a particular liking for younger married women, and had embarked on a number of affairs during his time at sea, and he was ready for his next. The more time he spent with Emma, the greater his desire grew. Emma was the polar opposite of Fanny, warm, vivacious, funny, and sharing his shameless love for the spotlight. As he left for sea, he knew that his heart would remain in Naples. Emma was the woman of his wildest dreams. But Nelson was the last thing on Emma's mind. Just a few days after his departure from Naples, Queen Maria Carolina and Emma received terrible news from France. Marie Antoinette was condemned to death. On October 15, 1793, she was carried in an open cart to the guillotine, where she was beheaded in front of a cheering crowd. Queen Maria Carolina and Emma were stunned and overwhelmed with unbearable grief. Despite how severe the political situation had become, Maria Carolina always believed that Marie Antoinette would be able to escape execution. Maria Carolina now depended on Emma for comfort more than ever. Barely able to process their grief, they now had a bigger threat to worry about: the rise of a man named Napoleon. Napoleon's armies were toppling cities all across Europe, rampaging populations and stealing art for their taking, and they were headed straight for Naples. Northern Italy had already fallen to Napoleon's troops. In February of 1788, Rome fell and the Pope was taken to France as a prisoner, where he died the following year. Maria Carolina began to have nightmares that the same violent end that took her sister would befall upon her too, pun intended. Desperate to save herself, Maria Carolina turned to Emma to help broker a stronger allyship between Naples and England. Being English, Emma was the perfect liaison, and the Queen trusted no one more for the job. Before she knew it, Emma was playing an integral role in Naples' political affairs. She made daily trips to court, carrying important letters and introducing various British diplomats to the Queen. She also wrote persuasive letters to the British government on the Queen's behalf. But words could only help so much. What Naples really needed was manpower to protect the city against Napoleon's troops. And Emma could think of no better man than General Horatio Nelson. In the spring of 1798, Horatio Nelson had been sent to the Mediterranean to fight Napoleon's armies. He proved to be a very successful general. Nelson triumphantly defeated Napoleon in both the Battle of Cape St. Vincent and the Battle of the Nile. News of these victories reached England and quickly turned Nelson into a national hero. Nelson was set to return to Naples again that autumn. Emma was ecstatic that England's war hero would be securing her city against the French. She sent Nelson an enthusiastic letter, exclaiming, "I am delirious with joy, and have a fervor caused by agitation and pleasure. God, what a victory! Never has there been anything half so glorious. I fainted when I heard the joyful news. I wouldn't like to die till I see and embrace the victor of the Nile. O brave Nelson, O God bless and protect our brave deliverer. O Nelson, what do we not owe to you? But Emma's praise was not purely politically motivated. With Nelson's newfound fame, every woman in England now desired him, and Emma wanted to be sure to capture the attention of England's latest heartthrob. Always a lover of the spotlight, she also understood that her association with such an icon would elevate her own status. When Nelson's ships docked in Naples on September 22, 1798, Emma knew that she needed to stand out amongst the cheering crowds. As he walked on shore, Emma dramatically flung herself around Nelson, to not only the crowd's surprise, but also her husband's. Nelson almost collapsed from excitement. Since his departure from Naples, his feelings for Emma only grew, and he couldn't believe that she was now wrapped around his neck. Emma swiftly led Nelson away from his mobs of fans back to her palazzo. In the frenzy of his arrival, she hadn't noticed that Nelson had returned a changed man. Though victorious, Nelson suffered severe injuries during his recent battles. Stone splinters had wedged themselves in his eyes, leaving him partially blind, and his pupil immobile. Then in 1797, his right arm was mutilated in battle and had to be amputated. Emma was not only taken aback at his appearance, but at his deteriorated physical condition. She devoted herself wholly to his convalesce, providing him with nourishing meals and showering him with attention. Perhaps taking some advantage of the situation, Emma made sure that Nelson was dependent on her for his recovery. She also made sure to seduce him just enough to turn his crush into an unbearable desire. She didn't mind that Nelson wasn't conventionally attractive, let alone missing an arm, partially blind, and covered in scars. Nelson must have been pinching himself in disbelief. Here he was being tended to by England's most beloved model. Emma was hands down the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. He loved her flirtatious nature, free spirit, and tender heart. As Nelson recovered, Emma began to play a bigger role in his life. Graduating from nurse and companion to secretary and political assistant, she helped him translate correspondences from English to both French and Italian, and continued to liaise between Nelson and the Queen, escorting him to court on a frequent basis. With Nelson at her whim, Emma was in the perfect position to make sure Nelson prioritized protecting Naples at all costs. But the more time Emma spent with Nelson, the more her genuine feelings for him developed. They found they had a lot in common. To start, they both came from impoverished beginnings and could relate to their respective experiences rising from nothing to stardom. Whereas others might have judged Emma for her early days of domestic service and prostitution, Nelson understood the limited choices women in her position had, and would have admired Emma's ability to make her own way in an often unforgiving world. For Emma, Nelson was one of the first people to see and appreciate her full self without judgment. They began to confide in each other their deepest, darkest secrets. It soon became clear that they were quite taken with one another. Within just 2 months of Nelson's arrival, rumors began to spread of their mutual infatuation, and newspapers published cartoons suggesting that England's two hottest heartthrobs had embarked upon an affair. When Nelson's wife read the gossip columns, her heart sank to her stomach, and she began sending Nelson desperate letters, demanding that he return or she would come to Naples herself. Sir William, on the other hand, though he would have witnessed their affections firsthand, had little suspicions. He knew that Emma had a flirtatious nature, and trusted her fidelity with blind faith. Though William was nearing 80, he wasn't necessarily intimidated by the one-armed, half-blind Nelson. Instead, he and Nelson became close friends, and the three spent a lot of time with each other. So much so that they began to call themselves Tria e Nucto in Uno, three joined together as one. Despite their harmonious relationship, Naples' political situation was in an extremely precarious state. Napoleon's armies were advancing at a rapid pace and were nearing Naples. The lower classes of the city began to support Napoleon's mission to topple all royal hierarchies, and riots broke out in the streets. Forever devoted to her queen, Emma continued to shuffle between the court and her palazzo, passing through hordes of angry protesters every day. When things only intensified, the king and queen had no choice but to plan their escape to Sicily before Napoleon's armies arrived. And the situation quickly became so dangerous that Emma, Sir William, and Nelson made arrangements to abscond with them. On December 21st, 1798, Emma boarded Nelson's ship with Nelson, Sir William, and the king and queen. In their hurry, Emma packed only the barest necessities, leaving behind not only their beautiful palazzo and 3 other houses, but all of their precious belongings. How did Emma feel as the ship sailed away from the shores of Naples, leaving the city she had grown to love behind? Was she terrified to once again lose her home and life as she knew it? What would she miss the most about the bustling city? As she saw Mount Vesuvius's smoke waft through the air one last time, did she feel that all in her own life had erupted? If their rushed escape wasn't devastating enough, the journey to Sicily was absolutely horrific. The weather was so stormy that passengers and crew alike prepared to capsize on several occasions. After 5 treacherous days, the ship finally arrived in Palermo. Though disheveled, they had made it out of Naples alive. Barely able to process her own feelings, Emma had to immediately tend to Sir William. Nearing 80, he had only narrowly survived the turbulent voyage and suffered a sharp decline in his health. He was also suffering from immense depression and anxiety. Their escape meant that Sir William had to leave behind his impressive collection of antique items from Pompeii, which had taken him years of dedication, care, and money to build. And he began to worry that their leave from Naples would have a devastating impact on his finances. Needing to now find housing arrangements in Palermo, Sir William saw an opportunity in Emma and Nelson's growing affection for one another. He accepted as time went on that his wife's relationship with Nelson had only deepened, and if there was little he could do to stop it, he might as well make it work to his advantage. If the 3 of them lived together, Sir William could ask Nelson to split the expenses and save him from further debt. He also knew that Emma was sneaking off every night to spend time with Nelson, and living in the same house would both keep Emma at home more often and keep her and Nelson's flirtations out of the public eye. It was the perfect arrangement. Living all together would make Emma and Nelson happy, and more importantly, save Sir William money and scandal. Emma was absolutely thrilled by the idea and set to finding the trio a perfect home. She eventually secured them a sprawling palazzo in Palermo's countryside. To Sir William's dismay, Emma managed to find the most extravagant palazzo in the area after the royal palace, and the rent was astonishingly high. Sir William only agreed on the assumption that the British government would be rewarding Nelson with high sums of money for his victories. Emma, on the other hand, carried on without a worry in the world. She began to throw opulent parties and developed a bad habit for gambling, often recklessly betting away absurd amounts of money. This concerned Sir William greatly, and to make matters worse, the ship he arranged to bring his collection of antiques to Sicily overcapped, and his precious objects sank to the bottom of the sea. And to rub salt in his already gaping wound, each night he had to watch as Emma and Nelson grew closer and closer. until it was obvious that it was only a matter of time that their emotional attachment turned physical. Emma held off as long as she could, wanting to be faithful to Sir William, but she could no longer resist her desire for Nelson. Their affair officially began in the palazzo in Palermo. The intensity of having to escape Naples, survive the dangerous voyage to Sicily, and now living in the same house and enjoying late nights gambling and drinking was the perfect storm to set their passion afire. Soon the two could not keep their hands off one another and spent many steamy Sicilian nights together in bed. Though humiliating for Sir William, he eventually accepted his new reality. At his age and deteriorating health, he understood that he could not give Emma what Nelson could, and he begrudgingly took a back seat to their relationship. It soon became clear that they had made the right choice to leave Naples. Just a few weeks after their departure, Napoleon's troops invaded the city. Nelson was called to return with his fleet to defend Naples. Unwilling to be separated from her lover, Emma accompanied him, remaining on his ship as he charged into Naples on ground. From the docks, Emma would have seen an unrecognizable city, torn apart by war. How did she feel as she peeped from deck and caught a glimpse of Napoleon's armies? Was she terrified to be so close to the battlefront? Was she worried that Nelson may not make it back alive? Or was the vision of her lover charging to defend the city she had grown to call home exhilarating? Fortunately, Nelson's defense of Naples was victorious, and he successfully drove Napoleon's armies out. Nelson and Emma returned to Palermo to share the good news. We can only imagine the electricity the lovers felt as they returned hand in hand as victors. To celebrate, Nelson and Emma planned a romantic getaway at sea, sailing to Syracuse and Malta on Nelson's ship. Emma rang in her 35th birthday on board, her happiest birthday yet. She also found out that she was pregnant just a few weeks into the trip. She was elated to think that the child of England's greatest war hero was growing in her very womb. Though the world around her may have been falling apart, Emma Hamilton was living her best life. We'll continue our story after a brief word from our advertisers.
After the end of a good fight, you deserve an ice-cold reward. Medela, you put in the hours, the energy, the tough labor, because you know the bigger the fight, the better the reward. Medela, the mark of the fighter. Drink responsibly. Beer imported by Crown Imports, Chicago, Illinois.
Welcome back, listeners. Now let's dive back in. After some time in Sicily, Sir William decided that it would be best for him and Emma to move back to England. Nelson eagerly agreed to join them. Emma was devastated to have to leave Italy, and more than that, the Queen, who had become her dearest friend. The Queen was equally saddened by the news. She wrote to Emma, "At all times and places, and under all circumstances, Emma, dear, dear Emma, shall be my friend and sister." When Emma had been tricked into moving to Naples 13 years earlier, she could never have imagined how attached she would become to the people and places around her. Italy was now her home, and it pained her to have to return to England. But at least she was returning with Nelson at her side, and their baby growing inside of her. Emma and Nelson were welcomed into London by excited crowds. But there was one person who was not very happy about her return: Nelson's wife, Fanny. If Fanny was upset by Emma's arrival, she was not at all prepared to see the clear bump forming around Emma's stomach. Not only had Emma taken her husband's heart, but she would now be able to give him the child Fanny could not. Fanny recoiled in deep humiliation. Though Nelson did agree to move back in with her, he spent most of his days visiting Emma. If he wasn't with Emma, he preferred to wander the streets to avoid being at home. Nelson came to detest the sight of Fanny and refused to act like husband and wife, even in public. To Fanny's dismay, the public was catching on to Emma and Nelson's affair. Newspapers published cartoons poking fun at their relationship. In many of them, Sir William was portrayed as old and out of touch, unable to keep his wife's attention. Many wondered how Sir William could be so accepting of Emma and Nelson's relationship, Fanny included. But in his late age, he appreciated Emma's company, if not as lover, then as companion. She was his emotional support, and he much preferred to have Emma around as a friend than to not have Emma around at all. He also genuinely liked Nelson and considered him a friend as well. As Sir William wrote in a letter, "A man of my age not ought to be attached to any worldly thing too much, but certain is the greatest attachment I have to the friendship and society of Lord Nelson and my dear Emma." Sir William spent most of his evenings with Emma and Nelson. Though society barely batted an eye when a man kept both mistress and wife, they could hardly believe a woman could do the same. With Nelson's success in the battles against Napoleon, he was promoted to vice admiral and requested to return to sea. Emma grew anxious over the possibility that Nelson might miss the birth of their child. As they said goodbye to each other, Nelson promised that he would write her as frequently as he could. During his leave, Nelson wrote long love letters to Emma, sometimes multiple times a day. In a letter that survives, Nelson wrote, "Last night I did nothing but dream of you. I kissed you fervently, and we enjoyed the height of love. Ah, Emma, I pour out my soul to you. No separation, no time can alter my love and affection for you. Emma, you are my guide. I submit to you." Their love was certainly one for the ages. With Nelson still at sea, on January 28, 1801, Emma gave birth to a healthy baby girl, whom she named Horatia after the baby's father. How did Emma feel as she held baby Horatia in her arms? Could she believe that she had a baby with the greatest war general England had ever seen? Was she filled with immense joy? Or was she sad that Nelson was not there for the birth? And did she feel guilty thinking of her first daughter, who she had to abandon many years prior? Because Horatia was born out of wedlock, Emma once again had to hand her baby over to a wet nurse almost immediately after her birth. This was also to protect Horatia from the press. Horatia would spend the first 18 months under the wet nurse's care. Emma was heartbroken to not have her baby at home with her. To ease her suffering, Emma did receive word that Nelson would be able to return for a short visit. When he arrived in London, Emma took him to meet his daughter for the first time. Nelson ran to cradle Horatia in his arms and exclaimed in joy, "A finer child never was produced by any two persons. I think her one, the most wonderful woman of the age." While in London, Nelson also took steps to divorce Fanny. But Fanny was a force to be reckoned with, and she made the process extremely difficult. Arguing that she had always been a faithful wife, Nelson had no real grounds to divorce her. Fanny knew that if she lost Nelson as her husband, she would also lose her respectability, and she would fight tooth and nail to keep him. Nelson soon after returned to sea, still a married man. He wrote to Emma in a heartfelt letter, "My own dear wife, for such you are in my eyes and the face of heaven. There is nothing in this world that I would not do for us to live together, and to have our own dear little child with us." Though not officially husband and wife, Nelson and Emma dreamed of owning a home together where they could raise Horatia in peace. While Nelson was on duty, he tasked Emma with finding them a home that they could call their own. In October of 1801, Emma settled on an estate called Merton Place, just southwest of London. Merton Place was a massive mansion that had fallen into disarray. It was a real fixer-upper, but Emma got a good deal and was happy to arrange for its renovation. She set to repairing the house, furnishing its many rooms, and harvesting the surrounding area into a fruitful farm. She wanted to turn Merton Place into a celebration of Nelson's achievements, and made sure that the first decor included plenty of Nelson's memorabilia. And soon, Emma would be able to enjoy Merton with Nelson himself. On March 25, 1802, a peace treaty was signed between France and Britain, marking the war between them over. Nelson was thereafter released from service and able to return to England. Emma threw an extravagant party to celebrate Nelson's arrival. But for Sir William, there was little to celebrate. As he aged and his health worsened, he became more and more exhausted by their relationship and Emma's overly active lifestyle. Having moved into Merton with Emma, Sir William became overwhelmed by the endless stream of parties and visitors. He wanted a quiet life in his final years and became increasingly resentful of Emma's disregard for him. Taking some space, he wrote to Emma, "If one cannot live comfortably together, a wise and well-concerted separation is preferable. But I think, considering the probability of my not troubling any party long in this world, the best for us all would be to bear the ills we have. I have but a very short time to live, and every moment is precious to me." And Sir William was unfortunately right about having little time to live. In March of 1804, he collapsed while walking on the street and was rushed home in severe condition. Emma was devastated by the news and hurried to Sir William's side, staying up day and night to tend to him. Despite her efforts, it was clear that Sir William was dying, and on April 6th, he passed away, cradled in her arms. How did Emma feel to watch her husband take his last breath? Did she feel guilty that her attention had been focused almost entirely on Nelson? Did she regret taking Sir William's presence in her life for granted? What would she miss about Sir William the most? Emma was utterly heartbroken over Sir William's death. He had been her loyal companion for over 20 years, and her husband for over 12. Though their romantic relationship had long dissipated, Sir William had been the first man to truly respect Emma and treat her as an equal. She could not imagine life without her sturdy steed by her side. She wrote to a friend, "Unhappy day for the forlorn Emma. Dear, blessed Sir William left me. I feel truly bereaved of all comfort. My wounds bleed afresh in writing and thinking on what I have lost in such a man, such a husband." To make matters worse, almost immediately after Sir William passed away, Emma became bombarded with creditors. She had not realized that Sir William had amassed so much debt. Having left his estate to Greville, Emma begged him to help her pay off Sir William's bills. But Greville was infuriated that Sir William had squandered much of his inheritance and had little pity for her. Reeling from the death of her husband and overwhelmed with Sir William's outstanding debts, Emma had quickly found herself in a disastrous situation. And because when it rains it pours, it soon became clear that Napoleon was breaking the peace treaty between France and England, and Nelson would be called back to war. Offered the prestigious title of Commander-in-Chief, Nelson was ordered to once again defend the Mediterranean. Emma would have to navigate her grief and the constant stream of creditors alone. After Nelson's leave, Emma spent most of that summer in a deep state of mourning. The stress of Sir William's finances gave Emma various health issues. Blisters broke out on her neck, and she suffered from persistent digestive issues. Once a lover of the spotlight, Emma had found herself hiding from the public, ashamed of her steep fall from grace. Emma had not known it at the time, but just before Nelson took off for sea, she became pregnant with their second child. In the weeks following his departure, she began to suspect that she was in her first trimester, and by midsummer it was clear that she was pregnant. Emma wrote to Nelson with the news, but knew he could not be back in time for the birth. At nearly 40 years old, Emma's pregnancy was extremely complicated. Miraculously, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl, whom she also named Emma. The labor was so hard on Emma's body that she became bedridden for several weeks afterwards. Tragically, baby Emma died of smallpox just 6 weeks after her birth. With Nelson gone, Emma was left to say goodbye to their child completely on her own. She became swallowed by grief and heartbreak. To ease her anguish, she turned to alcohol and laudanum, which led to severe migraines, digestive issues, and fevers. She became desperate for Nelson to return and comfort her in her greatest time of need. Emma wrote to a friend of Nelson, "I am anxious and agitated to see him. I love him. I adore him. It may be a sin to love when I was another's, but I am now free, and I must sin on and love him more than ever. It is a crime worth going to hell for." Unfortunately for Emma, loving Nelson was not the only crime that she would be punished for. Her debt was only accumulating. Despite creditors on her tail, Emma continued to renovate Merton Place for Nelson's return, spending irresponsible amounts of money on furniture and decor. Emma knew that she was digging herself into a deep hole that would be near impossible to come out of. But finding reprieve from her grief and loneliness in shopping, she continued to spend incessantly. As she wrote to a friend, "What I have done has been to make comfortable the man that my soul dotes on, that I would think it little to sacrifice my life to make him happy." As we will soon see, Emma would never recover from her reckless shopping, and her decisions in this time would haunt her for the rest of her life. Nelson finally came home in August of 1805. Though he was delighted to see Merton Place's impressive renovations, he returned to a changed Emma. Losing Sir William, and shortly after their newborn baby, Emma had lost her vivacious thirst for life. Nelson wanted to stay and care for Emma, and finally build the life together that they had dreamed of, but was called off to one last battle before he could retire, the Battle of Trafalgar. Staying only 25 days, Emma was shattered to have to say goodbye to Nelson once again. Nelson held Emma's hand and whispered, "Cheer up, we will look forward to many, many happy years." He promised that she was always with him in his heart. Teary-eyed, Emma watched as Nelson reported to duty one last time. Emma did not know it at the time that this would be their final goodbye, and that she would never see Horatio Nelson again. Emma cried every day, longing for Nelson's return. Through her tears she exclaimed, "I am once again broken-hearted, but what can I do? His powerful arm is of much consequence to his country." Emma clung to the belief that Nelson would soon be at her side, the victor of England's greatest battle yet. The night before the battle, Nelson wrote one final love letter to Emma. In his notebook, he drafted an addition to his will, reading, "I leave Emma, Lady Hamilton, a legacy to my king and country, that they will give her ample provision to maintain her rank in life. I also leave to the beneficence of my country my daughter, Horatio Nelson Thompson. These are the only favors I ask of my king and country at this moment when I am going to fight their battle." His notebook still in his pocket, Nelson prepared for battle the following morning. Although his officers advised that he should stay at the back of the ship, Nelson rather arrogantly insisted on being in the front. His insatiable hunger for glory would now cost him his life. When the French ships approached Nelson's fleet, they were given the orders to aim for the officers. An hour into the battle, a musket ball struck Nelson's left shoulder and lodged into his spine. He was carried down into the cockpit below, where he lay surrounded by dying men. Nelson knew, as he took labored and painful breaths, that his time had come to an end. As his fellow captain kneeled beside him, Nelson managed to whisper, "Kiss Emma for me." Emma was Nelson's last thought before he left this world. Though he would not be alive to see it, Nelson's fleet defeated the French army. The next day, Emma heard victory gunshots from her window. A few minutes later, a captain came with a letter for Emma. She assumed he was bringing her letters from Nelson. But just as she reached to take the paper from his hand, she noticed his ghostly pale face. As Emma later recalled, he came in with a pale countenance and faint voice said, "We have gained a great victory." "Never mind your victory," I said. "My letters. Give me my letters." Captain Whitby was unable to speak. Tears in his eyes and a deathly paleness over his face made me comprehend him. I believe I gave him one scream and fell back, and for 10 hours after I could neither speak nor shed a tear. Days have passed on, and I know not how they end or begin, nor how I am to bear my future existence. Emma spent days weeping in bed, cradling Nelson's belongings. Friends described her as scared and stunned, exclaiming to them, "He that I loved more than life is gone. Why should I live or wish to live?" Though Nelson loved Emma above all else, the British government took over arrangements for his funeral. Using his death as a prime opportunity to rally British patriotism, and wanting Nelson to be remembered as a flawless hero, they completely erased Emma from his history. When on January 8, 1806, Nelson's body floated on a giant barge to St. Paul's Cathedral, Emma was confined to bed, poring over Nelson's last letters to her. Not only was Emma not mentioned at his funeral, she wasn't even invited to be there, to honor the man she had loved more than anything in this world. Nelson's will was read that November. Emma was given a yearly stipend of £500, plus the estate of Merton Place. Her yearly salary was barely enough to maintain Merton Place for even a month. Optimistic that the government would honor the addition to Nelson's will found in his pocket and give her a higher pension, she continued to spend recklessly. She sent persuasive letters to the government, demanding that they honor Nelson's dying wish, but it soon became clear that the government had no intention to do so. Emma was left to fend for herself. Furious at the government's dismissal of her, she took to the press. The public was overwhelmingly on Emma's side, and even published Nelson's addendum to his will in her defense. Emma was quoted in an article saying, "Let them refuse me all reward. I will go with this paper fixed to my breast and beg through the streets of London." But the grim reality was that only the richest of women could survive without the financial support of a man. Nelson was delusional to believe that the government would honor his illegitimate mistress with a pension for his service, and should have made other arrangements. Without Sir William or Nelson alive, Emma had little means to survive. Though she knew that the surest way to secure her future was to remarry, she did not have it in her heart to look for another husband. Instead, Emma numbed her grief by continuing to renovate Merton Place, draining every last penny she had. Within 3 years of Nelson's death, Emma had accumulated over 15,000 pounds of debt. Creditors were now preparing to arrest her. She had no other choice but to sell the home that she and Nelson were meant to live happily ever after in. In July of 1808, Emma officially moved out of Merton Place. She was utterly heartbroken to have to leave the last tangible thing connecting her to the man she loved. To make matters worse, the market was the slowest it had been for decades, and there were no buyers in sight. Emma had become so stressed that she developed jaundice. By the end of the year, Emma was being bombarded with letters, and worse, hired toughs meant to intimidate Emma. When Merton Place finally sold the following spring, all of the money from the sale went towards her debt. To add to her devastation, Emma's mother, who had accompanied her through every twist and turn in life, passed away a few months later. Emma cried in despair, "I have lost the best of mothers, my wounded heart, my comfort all buried with her. I can now not feel any pleasure but that of thinking and speaking of her." Emma fell further into debt, paying for her mother's funeral. Emma spent most of the following year hiding in fear of being arrested. Knowing her petitions for assistance were hopeless, Emma fell into a deep depression. Afraid that the authorities could move in on her at any moment, that December Emma decided to turn herself in and move into the Rules, a 3-square-mile gated area around the prison walls. A bit of a loophole. Once in the Rules, Emma could not be arrested again. Confined to the enclosed area, Emma had to order in food, medicine, and other necessities. Though she took Horatio with her, the Rules was no place for a young child. Blood dripped down the alleyways into the gutters, beggars filled the streets, and the air was filled with smoke. Emma promised Horatio that she would do all she could to get them out of their grave situation. She sold most of her belongings, including her beloved portraits of Nelson, but her debt was a bottomless pit that ate every penny she earned. Emma wrote in a letter that she was determined to act with firmness, fortitude, honor, and prudence. But life in the Rules wore down both her spirit and health. It pained what few friends Emma still had to see Emma and Horatio living in such squalor conditions. They knew if she remained in England, she would never be able to pay off her impossibly deep debt. Now that the war between England and France was over, France was safe to travel to, and they began to devise a plan to sneak Emma and Horatio to Calais, a French portal city across the strait from England. They rallied enough funds to temporarily bail Emma out of the Rules, and she and Horatio made off to Calais in a small private boat from London Bridge. How did Emma feel as she and Horatio escaped hurriedly to France in the wee hours of the night? Was she heartbroken to have to leave the country she and her beloved Nelson had sacrificed so much to protect? Or was she relieved, exhilarated that she could have a fresh start for her and her daughter? Emma hoped she could make a new life for her and Horatio. Not knowing her financial troubles, Emma tricked the banks in Calais to give her a credit and lent her money. Instead of spending frugally, Emma quickly blew through whatever cash she was given by renting an expensive apartment in a hotel, throwing lavish parties, and paying for piano and harp lessons for Horatio. As she wrote to a friend, "I would sooner starve than her fine and beautiful mind should not be cultivated." Though reckless, Emma was willing to sacrifice all she had left to make sure her daughter had the life that she and Nelson always dreamed for her. After a few months, the money lenders in Calais caught on that Emma had no means to pay them back, and began to send their own creditors. Emma and Horatio had to move to a farmhouse outside of Calais where the rent was cheaper. The stress of the creditors once again on Emma's tail had a major impact on her health. She became confined to bed with intense stomach pain. Soon she wasn't even able to afford the farmhouse, and moved to a one-room apartment with Horatio. In a last-ditch effort, she wrote to England's government, "If there is humanity still left in British hearts, they will not suffer us to die in famine in a foreign country for God's sake." Her letter was never answered. Emma's health only worsened. To dull her shooting body pain, she took heavy doses of laudanum and mercury. Reality blurred into a dreamlike state. She struggled to breathe, her body began to swell, and she started to cough up blood. It was soon clear that Emma was dying. How did Emma feel as she took her last breaths? Was she worried about how 13-year-old Horatio would survive? Did she feel betrayed by her own country? Or was she relieved to be leaving such a cruel and unforgiving world? On January 15, 1815, Emma passed away at the age of 49, penniless and alone. Though one of her last wishes was to be buried in England, Horatio could not afford to transport her body home. Emma was instead buried in an unmarked grave in the public grounds outside of Calais. What few friends Emma still had helped Horatio pay for a ticket back to England, where she returned deeply traumatized. Though she did not incur her mother's debts, she was left with no inheritance to support her. Only 14, she became a housekeeper for a middle-class family and was given room and board. She eventually married a reverend named Philip Ward and had 8 children. Though she was the child of England's greatest celebrities of their day, Horatio lived a modest and simple life outside of the public's eye. For much of history, Emma has been wrongfully written off as reckless, selfish, and promiscuous. It is only in recent years that Emma has begun to receive the attention and recognition she deserves. In 1992, Susan Sontag wrote a novel titled The Volcano Lover, loosely based on Emma's life, and in 1994 a plaque was erected in the area in Calais where Emma's body is believed to be buried. Today, we aim to honor Emma as the determined, ambitious, brave, open-minded, and inspiring woman she was, a woman who always followed her own heart and believed in her own worth and talents. She lived a dazzling and intense life, filled with both romance and heartbreak, fortune and tragedy, and extreme wealth and poverty. There is no denying that Emma's rise from a miner's daughter born into complete squalor to the wife of an ambassador, advisor to the Queen of Naples, and lover of the greatest general in England's history is nothing short of extraordinary, especially considering that she received no formal education or outside help. A true survivor, Emma learned at a young age how to use her natural talents and beauty to her own advantage, and understood that her future depended on the protection of powerful men. She charmed her way into the hearts of Sir William, who secured her a title and connected her to the Neapolitan royal court, and Horatio Nelson, England's greatest war hero of the pre-Victorian age. Though Nelson is today remembered as the man who successfully defeated Napoleon, Emma has been unfairly written out of his history. Nelson was not only her lover and the father of her child, he worshipped Emma so much that she was his last thought as he took his dying breaths. And of course there is George Romney, the prominent portrait painter who became so enamored with Emma that he painted her more times than any other woman in history. Emma was not only Romney's beloved model and muse, she co-created his works with her exploratory and performative poses. As author Molly Hardick eloquently wrote, Emma was Romney's inspiration, literally a vision of beauty, the interpreter of his genius. He thought her superior to all womankind. She was his divine lady. Romney was so dependent on Emma as a source of inspiration that he continued to paint her image for the rest of his life. But not all of Emma's successes can be credited to her connections to powerful men. In many ways, Emma became Europe's first celebrity, known across the continent for her beauty and innovative performances, attitudes. An early form of performance art, attitudes was well ahead of its time and is a testament to Emma's genius as a creative. She was also an essential political player in the French Revolution and resulting Napoleonic Wars. She carried Marie Antoinette's last letter to Queen Maria Carolina, and later brokered an allyship between Naples and England. Just as she transformed herself in attitudes, she was able to transform her own identity in life. Mistress, model, performer, wife, lover, political advisor, and mother, to name a few. In the end, she fell victim to the limitations of pre-Victorian England, which made it near impossible for a woman to survive without the support of a man. Her fall from grace says much more about the confines of the world in which she existed in than any faults of her own. Her innovative and independent spirit was crushed by a society plagued with misogyny and sexism. We end today's episode with a poem written in 1830 as a tribute to Emma's life by Dr. William Beattie. She moved in brightness like an embodied dream of some rapt minstrel's warm imaginings, more than form and face of earthly things. Ah, when hath heart so warm, have hopes so fair, been crushed amid the darkness and despair? Few bend them at thy bier, unhappy one. All know thy shame, thy mental sufferings none. All know thy frailties, all thou wast and art. But thine were faults of circumstance, not heart. Thy soul was formed to bless and to be blessed. I hope you have enjoyed ArtMuse's two-part episode on Lady Emma Hamilton. I've included images, resources, and suggestions for further reading on the ArtMuse website and Instagram. ArtMuse is produced by Kula Production Company. Today's episode was written by me, your host, Grace Anna. Stay tuned as I continue to share the stories of the women behind some of the world's most important works of art. Until next time, bye for now.
If your day sounds like
We need the report ASAP.
you deserve Modelo. If you've persevered through, you deserve this rich golden lager with a crisp but refreshing taste. Or if you overcame,
2 more reps, 2 more.
you deserve this ice-cold reward. Modelo, the mark of a fighter. Drink responsibly. Beer imported by Crown Imports, Chicago, Illinois.